Welcome to The Authority On, the podcast brought to you by Device Authority.
Thank you for joining us, John. It's great to be here at the IoT SF conference this year. This conference theme is the past, present and future.
Right.
Can you tell me a bit more about why you chose this theme for this year's conference?
This is our 10th annual conference.
That's
So it
amazing.
felt very natural that we would take a moment
Yeah.
and look at where we've come from, where things are now and where we think they're going in the future.
Yeah.
So the OT Security Foundation was established on September 23rd, 2015.
Wow.
So that's actually 9 years, 1 month ago to the day. So it's not 10 years, but it's our 10th conference.
Yeah.
Because we start year 0 and we're now at 9. So that's fundamentally the inspiration behind picking the theme. Because we don't really want to talk too much about the past. We do a little bit of that, but it helps us understand the trajectory of things and what we're looking at, the issues now, and what we can see, not only what's coming down the line, but what we think has to change.
Looking back, what do you consider to be some of the biggest milestones in IoT security?
I think the first thing I would say is when we started looking at it, and my personal journey back in 2015, this was when IoT was at the peak of inflated expectations on the Gartner hype cycle. And it was there because everybody was talking about all of the wonderful applications and productivity gains and everything that we would get with IoT, but very few people were really talking about this dark underbelly, the security side.
Yeah.
And so that's where we came in and said, to enable this, we need good security. And if you look at the status of security at that time, the way I described it in kind of 3 simple phases is we had PC network security, and that was really bad to start with, but it got better, and we all got to the point where we understand doing updates is important. We then had mobile security when we went mobile first.
Yeah.
That was a phase, right? And that got better. There was a lot that was learned. It wasn't perfect. Still wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better. And then we got to the stage of IoT, and then everything was absolutely terrible again. In fact, the word I used at the time to describe the situation was egregious. I think milestones, for me, that's a starting point. That's where we start from. And now what we need to do is really start raising awareness that there is no IoT security applications, connected applications without security, because suddenly when you plug something in, the attack surface is huge. So somebody halfway around the world can get at you, whereas before, when what we call air gap systems, you connected, you have to be physically in physical proximity. And that was a massive thing. I think looking along the way, we were looking at things like standards and regulation, but we decided that we would go best practice because we can be much more agile because the need was here and now.
Yeah.
But for me, milestone for us, I'll try to put it in the context of general IoT, is we got busy very quickly and started looking at how do we help developers who have been got developer skill sets, but don't really understand security. So could we fast track them? And without really going through that long process of standards and regulations, so the here and now. For us, what a milestone was, we started to create some tools and some very practical guides to help developers understand security and implement it.
Yeah.
Along the way, we were also working with the standards bodies and the regulation authorities. And so just this year, I think it's quite a milestone for regulation. I spoke about this morning. It's the thing we had in the UK, the Product Security and Telecoms Infrastructure Act came in force. And just earlier this month, we heard that the CRA has been adopted by the European Council. So the direction of travel is clearly there, but this is regulation.
Yeah.
I think those are minimum requirements. So those are milestones, though. And of course, there would be quite an endless list of milestones in terms of hacks and bad things that have happened along the way.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, in terms of the direction of travel, things are definitely improving. Organizations understand better. There are many challenges, but I think we're making good ground. It's certainly a lot better than what was 2015.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like, we all start somewhere and then we realize that there needs to be regulation and process and everything else involved in it. It's getting everyone to adopt that and agree what's the right path.
Yeah, and you know what I would add to that, and I've said this many times, is regulation is so easy to get wrong and it's so hard to get right. It really is. Where do you start? And I think the UK approach was a good way. It started very low. In fact, when we were looking at the requirements of PSTI, but it wasn't PSTI at that point. But it was like, I would have liked to have seen privacy requirements in there at the base level, but the general consensus was we need to just get going. And the way that the act is written, the legislation is written is, it does the heavy lifting through Parliament, so the act is in place, but then it gets a review, so you can bring in new requirements. And so long there's enough rigor around that, so we said, okay, that's fine. Some security is better than none, but we all recognise that it's you wouldn't comply with PSTI and say, oh, look, security's done now, because it's not that simple.
As products evolve and technology evolves, security has to evolve as well. So it needs to be continuously looked at, doesn't it?
Just on that point, one of the things we've also talked about a lot is complexity, because that's the way the world is going. A very wise man who's actually here today and speaking once described IoT as being an independent, interdependent, complex system of systems with no guiding mind. And that's the way things evolve. It's growing organically. Lots of devices attaching to public networks. And that creates huge issues because you've got variable security across devices, across the networks, across cloud as well, which makes us all vulnerable because that's our connected world. And it's also been said again by another very wise man that security doesn't compose. And but that's what we've got to do. We've got to compose security because we're adding all these bits in. And I think that's something that the industry, not just industry, governments need to get their head around.
In the present day now, what are some of the most pressing security challenges that we have to face right now? Are there any specific threats or vulnerabilities that concern you the most right now from an industry level?
Yeah, I think just generally, yes. But to start with, when you start looking at security, a news story, and you go, oh, look at that news story, that's a concern. And then another one comes along and another one. And over time, the danger is you normalize the fact that these hacks are going on. And they are happening all the time.
Yeah.
Once you get into it and you understand what's going on, like the banks are being constantly hacked. Apple have been constantly hacked, although they won't really talk about it. But the point is that they can't deal with these things. With the world moving to more connectivity, which is fundamentally IoT, when products are becoming increasingly defined by software, which is ultimately hackable. So you've got vulnerability times hackability. It's not a good combination. Does that concern? Of course, it concerns everybody. The area that we work in is largely, we don't do nation states type stuff. Ours is more in the business end of things and back into the domestic side. Yeah. But I think people have become increasingly aware that security is important. Is there anything that really keeps me awake? I guess some things which are concerning. A few years ago, we saw the WannaCry hack, which kind of took the health service down. Yeah. Now, one of the points about that was the health service wasn't an intended target. It was collateral damage. The way that it went about, it took out vulnerable infrastructure without being a target. So I guess collateral damage is obviously a concern. We've just got to make our systems, but legacy, I think, is an interesting one too. I think there's a lot of good security solutions which are very good on new sort of greenfield sites, as we say, but we've got to protect the legacy as well. Even now, I would say there's signs, very promising signs. So one of the technologies that's been talked about today here at the conference is memory safety. If one of the silos gets hacked, it doesn't take the rest of the system out. So it can be resilient if you design it in that way. There's nothing that I would say that unduly keeps me awake at night. It may just be that I've been normalized over time. It is a real concern, especially at the nation state level, I think, especially where geopolitically tensions are very high and we talk about hybrid wars and things. Cyber is, I think, that is described as the fifth space. So at that end of things, yes, we should be a bit worried. But I would say, certainly in the business world, there's a lot of science for optimism. And the thing about security is it's never done. It's a moving target. It's got to be maintained. And I think companies are waking up to that fact. That's the path that we're on.
That's one of the things that we've found is that people are approaching us wanting to secure their legacy devices, but also wanting to find out more about securing devices at the edge or offline devices as well, which we can help them with. But it's getting that information out there. It's making sure that people know that these products are available to them and that they need them as well. And I think that looking at things like the colonial pipeline attack and stuff like that, it just builds that awareness. It makes us even more aware of how easy it is to get hacked but equally how terrible and devastating it can be when you are not being able to cover anything along the eastern seaboard is quite a major incident, isn't it? But it just grows that awareness as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think with that in mind, you have to adopt what was a game changer for me is, I say, coming from the world where things were mostly not connected. You've got to think about the way that you deal with security. You have to anticipate you are going to get hacked.
Yeah.
So how do you remediate from that? What is your plan once it happens? How do you fix things?
Yeah.
And that is very, in some way, it's still quite liberating, but it is a completely different mindset. You just accept it. Bad things will happen.
Yeah.
So do your best, keep on top of it, maintain it. And like I say, I see lots of signs that that's happening. And as you've just mentioned, in terms of legacy, there are systems and products and services that are available to protect those, at least contain any damage that can be done.
That's the thing, right? One of my colleagues, like you just said now, always says it's not a case of if, it's when it comes to being attacked.
When you become sufficiently interested, I mean, I think this is what I was alluding to when I was talking about collateral damage. So how do you get hit? If you're an interesting target, what is it you've got that somebody wants either access to directly, or they want to see you as a weak point into a system you're connected into? But there's also the collaterals. You're happily just being fairly in the world, but a rogue piece of software finds its way into your system, and it may not be, again, with the Internet of Things, where it really differs from the IT world. The IT world is largely about data protection, largely about confidentiality. If you look at many of the IoT applications, it's the integrity and the availability. And what I mean by that is if you take the service down, then that causes real harm. And that's where it becomes cyber physical. Yeah. So that's how a cyber threat becomes a real physical. So we talked about the NHS briefly. I mentioned it. If you can imagine the situation where someone's in an operating theatre and if the infrastructure goes down and, the lights go out, for example, or some piece of equipment is not available at that critical time, then that's a real world manifestation. I think people tend to think about cybersecurity in terms of the traditional IT challenge, but the new world with IoT, there's so much more to it, and sort of product security is different from information security.
I think as well is understanding the scope of what IoT is when it comes to this sort of thing, because like people might think of a Ring doorbell or a security camera, but I think people are starting to become a lot more aware that like your blood sugar monitor or your heart rate monitor are also included in that now, with the extra connectivity that everyone has, even things attached to your body or that monitor your body are within that scope as well. So again, there's that real medical and physical element to it all as well. So.
Yeah, I have a very simple definition, and that's anything that's connected to the public internet would immediately qualify as IoT, although some of it's more traditional, like computers. That stuff is pretty well catered for, so we don't tend to get too involved in that. It's a kind of new wave of stuff.
Yeah.
And then when you get into it's connected to a network, how does it connected into that network? And then you realize there are lots of different pathways. So you may have Bluetooth into a phone that goes through the telecoms network, or you may have a Wi-Fi device with a router. And so, devices may have multiple pathways to a network. So it's not just a one door access, as it were. And that builds interesting cases where devices, services can get hacked.
Yeah. And there's also it's not even just about the actual entry point of the attack either, is it? When it comes to IoT, you've got to think about the ability to help a threat actor laterally move throughout the network as well, hopping from device to device.
Really, again, I think some people would think about IoT as being like a low-cost sensor on the end of a network, and that's included. A car is a connected device. That's part of IoT as far as we're concerned. It's a big, heavy device, and you could write your own Hollywood script to turn that into a weapon. Yeah. And the classic, the vice president's pacemaker, which was real. So again, those would be directed attacks, but you quite often now be looking for other ways to get in with attacks. So the local sensor, we'd heard it quite a lot in the early days. This is only a cheap consumer piece of equipment. Why would anybody bother? Not with that. But once you've attached it to a network, you've just given them an entry point.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite scary, isn't it? So looking...
Well, I guess what I would say is we can't live our lives in fear.
Yeah.
Don't be scared. Do something about it. That's what we're about. Right?
Exactly. Looking into the future now,
Yeah.
we've got artificial intelligence, we've got 5G, quantum computing. They're often cited as key technologies for the future. How do these play into the IoT landscape?
Okay, I think having looked at AI this past year and doing a deep dive, the first observation I would make is I don't believe AI exists. I think it's machine learning.
Yeah.
There is a difference. So I don't see a sentient machine,
No.
which we would call intelligent.
It's analysing data and spitting that back out again.
Yeah, it does a very good simulation, which is why people think that could be spoonty, of course.
Yeah.
But it is a machine. So we have machine learning. And what I would say is that's not to take anything away from it because it's an incredible tool.
Yeah.
Especially on big data sets. When I looked at that, I did see a headline that said somebody was claiming that AI is running out of data. And so straight away, I was like, I don't believe that because it may be running out of internet data that it can scrape. But the thing about IoT is it produces phenomenal amounts of data. So there's a clear link there. There are many applications which throw data away because they can't use it in time. And so I think there are likely to be some very novel, innovative ways of making use of that data with tools like, let's call it machine learning or AI. It's easy to say that. Obviously, where quantum comes in, the big concern is about cracking security.
Yeah.
That's a bigger problem. That's computing in general. Absolutely. And let me see, what did you say? Quantum, AI, what was the one? 5G. Oh, yeah. So obviously the 5G network is not just a faster 4G, right?
Yeah.
G has provision for many more devices. So obviously that's the network.
Yeah.
So you're enabling many more things in remote areas to be connected up. So they all feature in the world of the future.
Amazing. So what are some challenges that we haven't faced yet that you foresee becoming critical as IoT adoption continues to grow?
I think from an industry point of view, if I start there, some of the things we've been discussing is, yes, regulation is coming, and that's generally a good thing. If the conversations we have, certainly with manufacturers, they see it as a good thing because it raises the bar and it keeps the kind of low-level bad actors out.
Yeah.
So it helps improve the quality of the market, and you've got to be there to compete. What it could mean, though, is that now the regulation's coming, everybody's going to need certifications. I say everybody's needs certifications. At the moment, you can do it with a self-cert. That's fine. But if you want a third party, like for a lab, then that could cause capacity issues if there are lots of products that need to go through labs, and especially if they're not in a position to really put it through a lab, because we talk to the labs and it's incredible how many companies they deal with who bring products in and then they have to send them away again to do some of the basics first because they're just not ready. Yeah. So I think that was of interest to me in some of our discussion to see that there could be a possible capacity issue looming there. It's not really about scaring. We said there were issues pretty much everywhere that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
And again, you start with the highest level ones first in priority and work your way through them. And there could be a very long list, which I won't go into. We're more optimistic than that. We, again, through forums like IoT SF, not just IoT SF, but because we're only one player, we work. The whole model of IoT SF is collaborate.
Yeah.
Collaborate at scale. That's what we try to do. We do our thing and we work well with others too. And I think that's important for us, collaborate at scale. So that's more of a positive slant on things.
Yeah.
But again, some of the challenges security has just in general is, I used to talk about the three enemies of security. The number one, cost.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. Nobody wants to spend on security. So you've got to take as much cost out. You've got to trend it to zero, in actual fact. The second is complexity. We talked a little bit about that, how complicated these systems are getting. So we've got to deal with the complexity. We've got to try and make it as simple as possible. And that would traditionally need new schema, ways of doing things. So some of the old ways will just be too clunky in a new world. And the third area, which if you're following my dialogue, we've got two C's there. So I've got another C, but can't quite get the third C. But almost, it's convenience or inconvenience.
Yeah.
If something's inconvenient, people will step around it because it's just too much of a gets in the way. So we've got to reduce the cost, we've got to make things simple, and we've got to make it convenient. Those are our challenges as an industry. What I would also say is, and I think certainly conversations have had a long way, and even today, is that if you just look at the very nature of IoT and the fact that you need to maintain security, it becomes quite clear that having product solutions is not a good way to go, because who pays for the security updates, unless you can sell a maintenance contract? I suspect many more IoT solutions will be services based.
Yeah.
Because you've got to build in the cost of maintaining security. And you think about it for a minute and you go, that's a logical conclusion.
No, exactly. That's where we came to with KSAS, really. It's like on-prem is just so expensive. So Keyscaler on-prem is still, although it's a very good solution, it's quite expensive. So moving it over to the cloud KSAS solution, it makes it a lot more affordable and accessible to people, and provides the convenience of being able to access it through the Azure Marketplace as well. So there you go. You try to meet all of those points.
Keep going in that direction. It's for what it's worth is my advice, but you're already on that one.
No, exactly. Yeah. So what advice would you give to organisations that are just starting to invest in IoT technology with regards to securing that infrastructure?
Okay, one of our founding values is security first.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned before, we don't think you can have IoT without security, as well as looking for the features in your system that, whether it's a productivity gain or whatever it is that you're looking for. Make sure that before you adopt a solution that you thought about security. You need to understand how to specify it and how to maintain it, and over the long term. And so we often talk about life cycle. What do you do at the start, and then how do you keep it fresh, fit for purpose? Fit for purpose is something we also talk a lot about, because context is king. You can spend and spend and spend. What you're really aiming to do is get to a point where that is actually sufficient. I can handle the risk now without having to keep spending more money. So what's your risk appetite? Or a phrase I saw in a session earlier, what's your risk budget?
Yeah.
A different way of thinking about it. And so make sure specifying it, procurement is a big thing, and maintenance. And I understand that. Don't ignore them. So make sure you do that all up front as best you can, and take advice where you if you're lacking in those areas. Rule number one of risk management is never accept a risk you don't understand. It's just a good piece of advice for life, I would say.
So finally, as someone who's seen the field of IoT evolve so much over the last 10 years, what do you see? What do you hope the future of IoT security will look like, and the role of the IoT SF within shaping it?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit earlier about fitness of purpose. And that's a phrase that I was familiar with in a prior role before I came into security, where I was looking at quality. In a past life, I was VP of operations for a chip company.
Yeah.
And when I thought about the way I used to think about quality was fitness of purpose. Is this fit for the purpose you want? And if it is, then it inherently has quality.
Yeah.
Different grades, of course, but it has quality. And what I would really like to see is longer term that for security to follow a similar path to security. So when I was younger in my career, quality was, you can imagine somebody sat at the end of a bench with an inspection lamp and looking at it go, yeah, that's fine. But what happened over the course of my career, this thing called total quality management came on, and basically it put quality into every process. So you were assured just via the process.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that's where we're going to go with security. So we just do it without thinking about it, because that's just the way we do it. We know we're in a connected world, and if you want to be secure, it's just the way we do it. And I think if we could get to that level, yes, we would talk about security, but it would just be, that's just the way everybody does it, right? It's not a bolt on. It's not something that we have to think about differently, but we just put it into it. And I would say I'm certainly seeing that being a kind of a mental shift now as we get going through the certification. People are talking less about the technical requirements, more about the organizational changes that are necessary in terms of the methods and the processes and the policies that they have, because that's a huge part of security. And the technical stuff is important in that, but there's so much more that you have to have around it. And so if you just do it that way, and in that, if we can do that, will bring the cost down, because that's just the way we do it.
Yeah.
It's not an extra.
No, it's like a given, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you for taking the time out from the conference.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Authority On, a podcast brought to you by Device Authority. If you have any questions about the subject matter in this podcast, please head to the Device Authority website, deviceauthority.com. See you next time.